All righty. Well, we are going to take another look at Ezekiel tonight, and we are up to chapter 12, and we're going to take a look at chapters 12 through 15 tonight. And we're going to start in chapter 11 as kind of a way of reminder and a way that kind of builds up to chapter 12. So let me give you a couple of quick reminders from last week, and then we'll get into some new material tonight. So we've been using this slide here as kind of a reminder that Ezekiel 1 through 11, Ezekiel has a vision of God's presence that begins in chapter 1, and then he has some various sign acts that he does in the process of communicating his message. And in the new section that we're starting at tonight, chapters 12 through 33, you have poems and parables and additional sign acts that are very specific about the coming destruction of the city of Jerusalem. And you'll see tonight in chapters 12 through 14, the first set of oracles is against the leaders of the nation of Israel. Because chapter 15 is so short, and then chapter 16 that we'll look at next week is quite lengthy, we'll go ahead and do chapter 15 tonight as well, even though it's not directed toward the leaders, but toward the nation itself. We'll take a look at that in a few moments. And then finally, this section finishes off with some oracles against the nations at large, not the nation of Israel, but others as well. So in chapter 12 through chapter 15, there's several key takeaways that I want you to look for. When you begin to take a look at chapter 11, one of the things that leads into this new section is God is going to continue to be a sanctuary to those who are in exile, even though he has departed from the sanctuary in Jerusalem. Secondly, the prophets are meant to provide a warning and also to help give guidance to help the people prepare for what is called a coming storm. That seems to be the figure of speech that is used. Thirdly, false prophets, though, will deny that there's any type of correction and discipline coming against the people. And so they will tickle the ears of those who want to think that the first invasion of Babylon is done and they have nothing to worry about. And then finally, observe how the Bible here talks about humans having a responsibility and discerning what to do in the middle of the storm that they are going to face. So in chapter 11, the key question that we finished last week is there any hope for Jerusalem? And if you begin in chapter 11, verse 15, there's a fascinating statement that I want you to keep in your mind tonight. In chapter 11, verse 15, it says, Son of man, your brothers who are your blood relatives, and the whole house of Israel are those of whom the people of Jerusalem have said, they are far away from the Lord, and the land was given to us as our possession. Now, that's an important statement, and here's why. They believe um, that the discipline has already ended, and those that were taken into exile, like Ezekiel, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, they are the leaders that were taken away, and their mindset is such that we'll establish new leadership, and they're away from us, so we have the possession of the temple, we have the possession of Jerusalem to ourselves now. Now, boy, that is not a very kindred spirit to think that, oh, well, their downfall is our gain. But that seems to be the mentality that those that were taken away were of the royal court, they were nobility. And as they are taken away, the people that are left behind, while they are more how do I down to the average type person because they're not elitists that are taken away into exile at this point. Yet at the same time, they feel they can establish the roles that they need to continue to live in Jerusalem. And part of this is also the mentality that I had talked about in previous weeks, thinking that, well, God is on our side and nothing can touch us. So that then begins to establish what is going to happen in the next section. Basically, Ezekiel is going to prove that they are responsible and that there is a coming storm, and that the people that are saying that there is nothing that they need to fear are giving false promises. So we, at the end of chapter 11, the glory of Yahweh up and leaves Jerusalem. And what happens next? Well, we see that in chapter 11, verse 16, by way of reminder, God promises to be among those in exile. It says, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. Although I sent them far away among the nations and scattered them among the countries, yet for a little while I have been a sanctuary for them in the countries where they have gone. I am meeting them where they are, in the middle of the storm, in the middle of their circumstance." Then he goes on down and he describes those that have stayed in Jerusalem who were not taken away. And in verse 18, he says, uh, they will return, this remnant that's going to return, and they're going to remove all its vile images and detestable idols. How and why? Because I will give them an undivided heart and put a new spirit in them. So God is promising that those that are in exile will return and that they will have a change of heart. The only problem is those that are still in Jerusalem and among the nations as well, can be both groups, they are still rebellious. So in chapter 12, I want you to just notice how it begins. In verse 1, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, you are living among a rebellious people. Now, that's a theme that's going to occur often in this chapter. It says here in verse 2, they're rebellious people. Verse 8, they're rebellious house. So that verbiage continues to pop up in this chapter. Now, what's going to happen is in chapters 12 through 23 and 24, God is going to show them that God's judgment is on Jerusalem, and he's going to talk about it from various angles. So if you take a look here, it talks about the prophecies of judgment against Israel, the people, and Jerusalem, the city. And in that second major bullet point there, some of the oracles, such as chapter 15, 16, 18, and 20, are against the entire nation. Some of them are against the inhabitants that are still in Jerusalem, chapters 19 and 24. And others are against the royal leaders, chapters 12, 17, and 19. And then others are against the prophets in chapters 13 and 14. So it's kind of all over the place, as you can see. He doesn't leave anyone untouched, but it's not like it's sequential. It's not like he talks about the nation in 3 chapters and moves on to the inhabitants in the next 2 chapters. It jumps around a bit. And this might be a writing style or it might be an editing element. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, it's going to hop around a little bit in this section. So when you look at this section, it has a lot of diversity to it. It will continue what is called sign acts, Ezekiel acting out the message he is communicating. That's going to be true in chapter 21 and chapter 24 as well. The one in chapter 24 involves the death of Ezekiel's wife, which we'll get to at a later time. The second form in this section is kind of like a legal case study. And there's these different scenarios that are drawn up to show the nature of God's justice in contrast to human behavior. And so in this section, it's legal in some spots, it's symbolic in others. Thirdly, it can be also parabolic. There are parables that are given. We're going to see one of them tonight in chapter 15. Israel is being envisioned as a burnt stick. But next week is the big one. In chapter 16, Israel is going to be represented through parable form as a great prostitute. So you have that to look forward to next Wednesday night. And then finally, there are some funeral laments or dirges. And chapter 13 is a funeral lament upon those who have become false prophets among the people. And then later in chapter 22, there's a funeral dirge for the city of Jerusalem itself. So just take a look for those elements as we move along in this study tonight and next week. All right, so how does it begin? Well, it begins as a sign act that Ezekiel is acting out, and you'll notice it. Let's begin in chapter 12. In the first 20 verses, there is a symbolism that is kind of representing uh, the attempt of King Zedekiah to escape the city of Jerusalem. Okay, so here's how it goes. Verse 1. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, you are living among rebellious people. They have eyes to see, but do not see, and ears to hear, but do not hear, for they are a rebellious people. Therefore, Son of man, or as in the New Revised Standard Version says, oh, therefore, mortal one, pack your belongings for exile, and in the daytime, as they watch, set out and go from where you are to another place. Now, be reminded Ezekiel is already in exile. However, he's going to pack a bag and he's ready to go, and he's going to act out as if he's leaving. It says here, perhaps they will understand, though they are a rebellious house. That's the third time in the chapter already. During the daytime, while they watch, bring out your belongings packed for exile. Then in the evening, while they are watching, go out like those who go into exile. So he is actually using the symbolism of one who is in exile, packing his bags and leaving, to illustrate really those who are going into exile. And verse 5 says, while they watch, dig through the wall and take your belongings through it. So this is going to be a hint to what is happening when Zedekiah tries to dig out from some of the rubble around Jerusalem and is trying to escape. So keep your finger here. Go back to Jeremiah chapter 39 for a moment. It seems to be a close type of passage to what Ezekiel is saying. So in chapter 39 of Jeremiah, which has a lot of similar themes as Ezekiel, this specifically is talking about Zedekiah. Take a look at verses 1 through 7. This is how Jerusalem was taken. In the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army and laid siege to it. And on the 9th day of the 4th month of Zedekiah's 11th year, the city wall was broken through. Then all the officials of the king of Babylon came and took seats in the middle gate. Nergal, Sharezer of Shamgar, Nebo Sarsekim, a chief officer, and Nergal Sharezer, a high official, and all the other officials of the king of Babylon. When Zedekiah, the king of Judah, and all the soldiers saw them, they fled. They left the city at night by way of the king's garden through the gate between the two walls. You see, in the dark, he's trying to find an opening to get out of the city. But the Babylonian army pushed them and overtook Zedekiah in the plains of Jericho. So they do get away, but they're chased down by the Babylonian army. They captured him and took him to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, at Riblah in the land of Hamath, where he pronounced sentence on him. There at Riblah, the king of Babylon slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and also killed all the other nobles of Judah. Then he put Zedekiah's eyes then he put out Zedekiah's eyes and bound him with bronze shackles to take him to Babylon. So that's the backdrop to Ezekiel chapter 12. It's really talking about Zedekiah, and it's talking about his ability to get away, at least for a little while, before he's overtaken, and he is then taken into exile to Babylon. Remember, he's a puppet king that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and so this is showing that he's being taken back. So let's come back to Ezekiel chapter 12. So in verse 6, or verse 5 rather, it says, while they watch, dig through the wall and take your belongings out through it. Put them on your shoulder as they are watching and carry them out at dusk. Cover your face so that you cannot see the land, for I have made you a sign to the house of Israel. There's the term right there. This is a sign act for them to interpret. It's kind of parabolic as well. Then Ezekiel says, so I did as I was commanded, and during the day I brought out my things packed for exile. Then in the evening I dug through the wall with my hands. I took my belongings out at dusk, carrying them on my shoulders while they watched. And in the morning the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, did not that rebellious house of Israel ask you, what are you doing? So it was all a setup so he could explain that the invasion of Babylon is not finished, that another one is coming. And it did come, and that's what we read a moment ago in Jeremiah 39. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. This oracle concerns the prince in Jerusalem and the whole house of Israel who are there. Say to them, I am a sign to you. As I have done, so it will be done to them. They will go into exile as captives. So he's symbolically showing what's going to happen to those in Jerusalem and specifically what happened to Zedekiah. So this is the first of two dramatic prophecies in chapter 12. Um, and Zedekiah is kind of at the heart of it. The second sign act begins in verse 17. So the word of the Lord came to me. Now that's another repeated phrase as well in this chapter. It began in verse 1, it begins in verse 17. It says, Son of man, tremble as you eat your food and shudder in fear as you drink your water. Say to the people of the land, this is what the sovereign Lord says about those living in Jerusalem and in the land of Israel. They will eat their food in anxiety and drink their water in despair, for their land will be stripped of everything in it because of the violence of all who live there. The inhabited towns will be laid waste and the land will be desolate. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So the next thing he does is he pantomimes eating while shaking. So, think of the anxiety type of thing that uh, can come over a person where they can't control their bodily movements. That's what's happening. Ezekiel does it on purpose, but the people are going to kind of continue to eat and keep watch out of the corner of their eye because they know that the threat is not finished yet. So these are the two sign acts that Ezekiel does saying, hey, another invasion is coming. All right. Then, what's the reason? Now, here's the reason. It starts in chapter 12, but it continues into chapter 13. It says here in verse 24, for there will be no more false visions or flattering divinations among the people of Israel. Um, that's the cause. The leadership is not telling the people the truth. And we know that because if you look at verse 21, it says, Son of man, what is this proverb you have in the land of Israel? The days go by and every vision comes to nothing. It's just more rhetoric. Don't worry about it. It's just political rhetoric. Just go on with your life. Continue what you're going to do. Don't worry about anything. And then in verse 26 of chapter 12, it says, Son of man, the house of Israel is saying the vision he sees is for many years from now. Oh, don't worry about it. That's in the distant future. It's sort of the same type of thing that politicians do even today. They just kick the can down the road. Somebody else can worry about that. Don't worry about that. So you get to chapter 13. And it's specifically focused on these false prophets that's kicking the can down the road or denying that any of these things are going to come to pass. So in verses 3 through 11, it says, This is what the sovereign Lord says, Woe to foolish prophets who follow their own spirit and have seen nothing. Your prophets, O Israel, are like jackals among the ruins. You have not gone up to the breaks in the wall to repair it for the house of Israel, so that it will stand firm in the battle on the day of the Lord. Their visions are false and their divinations a lie. They say, The Lord declares, when the Lord has not sent them. Yet they expect their words to be fulfilled. Have you not seen false visions and uttered lying divinations when you say, The Lord declares, though I have not spoken? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, because of your false words and lying visions, I'm against you, declares the sovereign Lord. My hand will be against the prophets who see false visions and utter lying divinations. So the issue is they're taking God's name in vain. They're saying this is coming from God, but it's not really coming from God. So if you look at the bullet points beneath this statement, Ezekiel 13, 3 through 11 has these various images. You can break it down in this way here. They follow their own spirit. They think their message represents God, but it's really their own desires. They're like foxes among the ruins. They're like scavengers taking advantage of people. They don't go up to the breaches that have been put in the wall to repair it or to rebuild it. They just let those holes stand, thinking, let's not put the money or the time or the effort into it. They claim divine authority. They say they get this message from God. And then, if you look at verse 10, it says here, because they lead my people astray, saying peace when there is no peace, because when a flimsy wall is built, they cover it with whitewash or paint. Okay. They don't repair it. They don't make it stronger. They just cover it over. Therefore, tell those who cover it with whitewash that it's going to fall. Rain will come in torrents, and I will send hailstorms hurtling down, and violent winds will burst forth. And when the wall collapses, will not people ask you, where's the whitewash you covered it with? In other words, a lot of good that did, that you painted it because it didn't stand. So a lot of vivid imagery here, isn't there? Saying, hey, don't listen to these false prophets. They say things just so that you can push it down the road and not worry about it. Now, most of the time when we think of prophets, we think of men, but there are women prophets that are found in the Old Testament, and there is a specific paragraph that is mentioned here that's going to direct God's anger toward the women, not just the school of the prophets that are men. So take a look here, beginning in verse 17. It says here, Now, son of man, set your face against the daughters of your people who prophesy out of their own imagination. Prophesy against them and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the women who sew magic charms on all their wrists and make veils of various lengths for their heads in order to ensnare people. Now, what they have going for them is they visually use objects as magical uh, tokens, if you will, that can be given to people, or more probably more precisely sold to people as a way of giving security. So there's a lot of that in religion, goes way back, where an object is endowed with some type of magical charm and people will hold it, um, pray over it, thinking they're secure if they have X number of these things in the home. It can be crystals, it can be crucifixes, it can be rosaries, it can be a whole bunch of different things. And the trust is in that object rather than looking to the Lord and relying upon God. So it says in verse 19, you have profaned me among my people for a few handfuls of barley and scraps of bread. Now that's an interesting statement there. So we know that resources were getting slim because of the first invasion. And so these prophetesses, they would give these magical incantations, kind of like fortune tellers or something, that is to give peace to people, to ease their nervous spirit, as long as they got back a little bit of barley and bread. It was a way of their continuing to eat themselves. But it says here, by lying to my people who listens to lies, you have killed those who should not have died and have spared those who should not live. Boy, that is a powerful statement. You took their bread away. They died of hunger. And you took those resources knowing that you're pulling the wool over their eyes and you're giving them false promises and so forth. So in verse 20, it says, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I'm against your magic charms in which you ensnare people like birds, and I will tear them from your arms, and I will set free the people you have ensnared like birds. God is quite compassionate toward those who had been duped. They think they can trust their prophets and prophetesses, but they can't. They have been told lies. And as a result, they've given over some of their resources and their barley and their bread as a way of paying for their services. So, so when you then come to chapter 14, there is a literary design here that is quite interesting. There's an introduction in verses 2 through 12. And then there's a kind of a four scenario situation that are outlined as a result of the type of uh, judgment God is bringing: famine, wild animals, sword, and plague. And then it kind of finishes off with a guilty remnant of people. So, first off, let's take a look here at chapter 14. And then I'm going to have us kind of cross reference over to Leviticus 26. And then we'll come back to chapter 14. So, verse 1 says, some of the elders of Israel came to me and sat down in front of me. And then the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, these men have set up idols in their hearts and put wicked stumbling blocks before their faces. Should I let them inquire of me at all? In other words, Ezekiel's saying, you know what? They're not going to listen anyways. Why should I sit down and converse with them? But therefore speak to them and tell them. God is being gracious. Tell them one more time. Maybe something will break through. Maybe they will see. Maybe they will hear. Therefore speak to them and tell them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. when any Israelite sets up idols in his heart and puts a wicked stumbling block before his face and then goes to a prophet, I, the Lord, will answer him myself in keeping with his great idolatry. I will do this to recapture the hearts of the people of Israel who have all deserted me for their idols. Therefore, say to the house of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says: repent, turn from your idols, and renounce all your detestable practices. So, idolatry is at the heart of chapter 14. It had been condemned quite early in the Torah. So, keep your thumb here and go over to Leviticus 26 for a moment. Keep these four images in mind: famine, wild animals, sword, and plague for a moment. And when you get to Leviticus chapter 26, the first part of Leviticus 26 talks about blessings and rewards if the people will be obedient toward God, and then punishment for disobedience. Now, in that section, beginning in verse 14 of Leviticus 26, it says this: but you will not listen to me and carry out all my commands. And if you reject my decrees and abhor my laws and fail to carry out all my commands and so violate my covenant, then I will do this to you. All right. Okay. What are some of these things that I am going to do to you? Well, first thing it says here, as it goes forward, you will plant seed in vain because your enemies will eat it. So there's going to be kind of a shortage of food because it's going to be taken by the enemy. And it goes on and says, I will set my face against you so that you will be defeated by your enemies. Those who hate you will rule over you, and you will flee even when no one is pursuing you. Then here's what it goes and says in verse 18: after all this, you will not listen to me. I will punish you for your sins 7 times over. I will break down your stubborn pride and make the sky above you like iron and the ground beneath you like bronze. There it is. Famine is going to come about. Then come down to verse 21. If you remain hostile toward me and you refuse to listen to me, I will multiply your afflictions 7 times over. What am I going to do? I will send wild animals against you, and they will rob you of your children, your cattle, and make a few in number that your roads will be deserted. There's the wild animals. Then he goes on in verse 25, and I will bring the sword upon you to avenge the breaking of the covenant. And then finally, down in verse, let's see where it's at here. In spite of this, you will not listen to me. Then in anger, I will be hostile to you. In verse 27, I will punish you for your sins 7 times over. You will eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. The plague is going to come, and the only way they're going to survive is cannibalism. Verse 32 says, I will lay waste to the land. So, where did Ezekiel get these four things in chapter 14? They come right out of the covenant stipulations in Leviticus 26. So let's go back to Ezekiel 14 now. And I'll just point this out to you. So, verse 13, Son of man, if a country sins against me by being unfaithful, he's going to cut off food supply and send famine. There it is. Exactly what Leviticus 26 said. Down in verse 15, or if I send wild beasts through the country, correlating to Leviticus 26. Verse 17, or I will bring a sword against that country. And then finally, verse 19, or if I send a plague. Do you see the four things there? Famine, wild animals, sword, and plague. Ezekiel is reminding the people of what had already been said back in Leviticus. So the bottom line basically is this, though: Jerusalem is doomed because of her idolatry. And those that had deceived the people, the prophets and prophetesses, judgment is coming upon them because they convinced people and pulled the wool over their eyes, and people believe them when nothing that they said is true. Now, here's the conundrum. The conundrum is this: Ezekiel says, I have a message from the Lord. The false prophet says, I have a message from the Lord. Who do you believe? And what is the credentials that are needed to believe one is true and one is false? That will take some discernment on the part of the people, which it seems as though they don't have. They have eyes that can't see and ears that can't hear. There's a vulnerability, it seems to me, when we look to our leaders to know what is true and what's not true, if they're telling us the truth or if they're telling us lies. And I think we find that in our own situation quite often. How do I know what the truth is? How do I know who's telling me what's right and who's intentionally trying to deceive me? Well, the bottom line here in chapter 14 is Ezekiel is saying judgment is inescapable, basically. Jerusalem is doomed, and it will come about, and it will happen right before their very eyes. And so he challenges the people to consider again and to repent from their idolatry, worshiping false gods. So you have an inescapable punishment that is coming, and these hypothetical situations. And I think in chapter 14 of Ezekiel, they're at this point hypothetical. Those four things that we see, the famine and the wild beasts and the sword and plague, they're hypothetical. But then he does something interesting in chapter 14. If you come to chapter 14, verse 13, it says, Son of man, if a country sins against me by being unfaithful, and I stretch out my hand against it to cut off its food supply and set famine upon it, and kill its men and their animals, even if these three men, and he names three people, Noah, Daniel, and Job, Noah, Daniel, and Job, even if they were in the city, they could only save themselves by their righteousness, declares the sovereign Lord. In other words, every person has a responsibility to do what's right. You can't look to these heroes of the faith, Noah, Job, and Daniel, and expect them to deliver you from what is coming to pass. Now, you'll note here in the name Daniel, you'll note down at the bottom of your Bible in verse 14, it says here, or Daniel, Danel, rather than Daniel. The Hebrew spelling may suggest a person other than the prophet Daniel. And you see that also in verse 20 as well. They're restated, Noah, Daniel, and Job. So look here on the screen. Ezekiel, while he has this hypothetical hall of fame of righteousness, Noah, Job, and Daniel, some scholars are suggesting that it may be a different person than Daniel the prophet. Danel, Danel, was a famous Syrian king that was renowned for wisdom and justice among his own people. There is a mention of this again in chapter 28 of Ezekiel. And in chapter 28, verse 3, it says here, Are you wiser than Daniel? Is no secret hidden from you? Now, the way that is stating, as it's a prophecy against the king of Tyre, one of the oracles against a foreign nation, it seems to me it suggests Daniel the prophet because he was wise, he he was able to interpret dreams and stuff. But I just want you to be aware that there is a textual variant. And once again, down at the bottom of your Bible, it will say, or this could be Daniel. The Hebrew spelling might suggest somebody other than Daniel the prophet. I think it's Daniel the prophet personally, but because it also talks about Noah and Job, those that have been righteous, even in the middle of some disastrous situations, like Noah and the flood, Job, and all of the things that he suffered. And of course, Daniel is in exile. The and if it is Daniel the prophet, then Ezekiel is talking about one of his contemporaries that are in exile with him. Okay, so you can do with that what you want. I just, thought I'd point it out that that could be a different individual in chapter 14. Okay, now we come to a change from this sign act and these oracles. And now what we see taking place is a parable in chapter 15. And it's not a very long chapter. This particular parable begins, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, how is the wood of a vine better than that of a branch on any of the trees of the forest? So now there's a setup here. Is vine better and stronger than wood that comes from a tree? Is wood ever taken from it to make anything useful? Do they make pegs from it to hang things on? And after it is thrown in the fire as fuel, and the fire burns both ends and chars the middle, is it then useful for anything? If it was not useful for anything when it was whole, how much less can it be made into something useful when the fire has been burned and it is charred? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: as I have given the wood of the vine among the trees of the forest as fuel for the fire, so I will treat the people living in Jerusalem. I will set my face against them. Although they have come out of the fire will yet consume them. And when I set my face against them, you will know that I am the Lord. I will make the land desolate because they have been unfaithful, declares the sovereign Lord. Now, this parable is once fire is set to either wood or a vine, basically, in the end, neither is very productive for anything or useful for anything. So the charred remains of vine and wood are consumed, um, and but basically, what he is talking about uh, is those that are left behind who refuse to repent from their idolatry might think that they are spared, but in the end, they will be consumed by this invasion. So, some of the Jerusalemites that had already come out of the fire, those that were first exiled in the first invasion in 597, we'll see another fire burn up the rest that has been left behind. And that's the second invasion in 587 BCE. So this is portraying Jerusalem as a useless vine that needs to be consumed so that it might start over. So chapters 12 through 15 have used sign acts, oracles, and parable. Okay. And it just keeps changing around throughout the book. You gotta have some patience when you read Ezekiel, because it flips around and it forces you to sit and ponder the imagery that is being used and the warning that is being given. So, a lot of people find this so frustrating that they just don't bother at all because, you know, it is complicated. It is a very complicated book. But I'm going to stop the recording and we'll talk about it a little bit. And here's the question that we will ask. What are some of the thoughts, questions, or reflections that you have on tonight's study? All right. So we took off a big chunk, 12 through 15. Uh, what are some things that come to your mind? So this is not being recorded. You can be as bodacious as you'd like in any of your questions or comments.
My thoughts are on this false prophet thing. Um, there's 100,000 Protestant Christian denominations and a couple 100,000 preachers preaching different messages,
Hmm.
and you ask yourself which message is correct, and then you got our friends, the Christian nationalists, out there, and I saw on Facebook someone posted that a picture of the Bishop Buddy. Is it Buddy or Woody? I'm not sure. The Episcopalian
Yeah,
minister from
the
Washington.
lady, the lady
Yeah,
that begged for mercy to Donald
yeah,
Trump.
yeah. And it said, "Beware of false prophets," and it quotes Jeremiah 23:16. They speak a vision of their own heart, not from the mouth of the Lord. So, she's begging mercy on the less fortunate, but some look at that as a false message, like maybe the false messages that Ezekiel's counterparts there were. They were preaching a good message, a positive message, and he's preaching this negative message. And who do you want to believe? And kind of hard.
Yeah. Well, I guess you those of us who live on this side of the cross and the teachings of Jesus, it seems to me, let me preface this by saying I don't think there's a perfect theology out there that answers all the questions, that fills all the holes in human existence. I just don't think it's there. But living this side of the cross, in light of the teachings of Jesus, when he boils everything down to love God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. All the prophets are fulfilled in this. And so for me, um, even when people might say things that I kind of go, I have a little bit different viewpoint on that, does it lead to greater love toward God and toward neighbor? And if it does, then I need to be humble enough to know that God will use a variety of different viewpoints. Um, I don't think any of us are unbiased. We all have our own biases because of our own upbringing and education and experiences and so forth. And and we all have our blind spots that we can't see either. And and so when I see somebody loving their neighbor as themselves, I go, okay, God approves of that. And that's all she's asking is for politicians and leaders to love their neighbors as they would love themselves. Now, when I look at that, I go, and you're going to condemn that? Um, well, why? Why are you condemning that? What do you have to lose as a result of loving your neighbor as yourself? What are you trying to protect? Your own resources, your own money, your own position and power, and that type of thing. And so that's kind of the way I try to reconcile these type of things, where, okay, in the end, a tree is known by its fruit. And if it's the fruit of love, we can be thankful for it. So that's kind of how I reconcile, these things. But it's difficult. You're right, Brenda. It's very difficult because it's a myriad of different voices that are constantly flooding, and they come from a lot of different religious positions, and so that's sometimes frustrates people to no end. But if we can boil it down, does this help me love God better? And does it help me love my neighbor better? That's a pretty good grid through which to evaluate, what we hear. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. Um, as you said, we're on this side of the cross uh, in our time. The Old Testament didn't have that
Yeah,
advantage,
yeah,
but it does seem like it, as you said, it's boiled down to um, the most important commandment, love. And a lot of people, they have a hard time. Um, well, they just have so many different ways of looking at things. They just cannot seem to simplify it,
yeah.
and they seem to get a lot of pleasure out of demonizing someone else.
Mhm. Yeah. And the key question for me is why? What type of joy do they get in demonizing other people, or what are they protecting? What type of privilege do they have that they're trying to protect by demonizing other people? I'm watching what's taking place, and basically, I told Esty this morning. Every morning I get up and I usually turn on one either CNN or MSNBC, and I just kind of hear the rhetoric that's going on. And when you begin defunding everything so that it becomes kind of like that whitewashed fence that we're talking about out of Ezekiel here. It's not going to hold. It's going to fall down and it's going to crumble because you've taken everything away. I told her this morning, I think what we're seeing is the slow movement toward communism, trying to dismantle the democracy and dismantle the responsibility for those that are less fortunate in society. If there's one clear message in the Bible, all the way through, both Old and New Testament, is you got to take care of the poor. You got to take care of those that can't help themselves or fend for themselves, or, you know, and then, of course, that involves immigrants too. I mean, there's a lot of things in the Torah. Get that? I mean, in the Jewish Torah, talking about caring for those that are immigrants and those that are refugees and those that are just trying to survive. And but I really think, to come back to what I began with, is when you dismantle and defund everything except your own tax breaks, um, you're basically trying to build a structure that does not have enough strength for it to stand, because at some point something's going to happen when you need those emergency services, or different things that you defunded because you know you didn't want to pay for it. As politicians, I'm talking. um, you know then we're really going to be up a creek, because you can't you can't restructure those things overnight. I mean, if you're going to destroy it, it's going to take a lot of time to rebuild it too. So I don't know. Those are just some of my thoughts. And in that case, I think Ezekiel has a very powerful message for even leadership in our day and age too. Some other thoughts. So hopefully you're seeing even the most difficult text that you have in the Bible does have some connecting points to contemporary life, if you're willing to try to be creative enough to look for them and see where it has some powerful principles or purposes for our own day and age. So, any other thoughts or comments that you have? Okay, well, we'll close off tonight, and Mark, I will see you tomorrow. I don't have to
Okay,
work.
I'll be
Oh,
there.
I should be there too.
Okay,
Okay, we'll
great.
be there.
All
Last
right.
week we only had two of us.
When?
Pardon?
Today?
Last Thursday.
Oh,
Oh,
last.
Yeah, last Thursday it was only two of us. So
Yeah,
we managed okay. We didn't have that many people, so
yeah.
worked
Okay.
out. But
Well, I'll see you guys then tomorrow,
okay.
and we'll see you Sunday then. Okay.
Yep.
All
All
right.
righty. Good
Hey,
night.
Okay. Good
good
night.
night.